Some stories don't begin with a scream. They begin with silence so perfect, it almost feels sacred. In the sleepy little town of Brookhaven, where porch swings still creak on Sunday mornings and neighbors wave like clockwork, there lived a couple everyone admired, maybe even envied. Leonard Brooks and Clarissa Brooks. For 30 years, they were the definition of stability. Dependable, quiet, the kind of couple people pointed to and said, "Now that's what lasting love looks like." Leonard was Brookhaven's most trusted figure, a decorated police officer with a flawless record and an even more flawless routine. He wasn't just punctual, he was the town's clock. Every morning, same coffee, same uniform, same nod to the grocer at 7:01 sharp. You could time your morning by the sound of his cruiser rolling down Elm Street. He was calm, disciplined, the kind of man who never raised his voice, never missed a church service, and polished his boots even after he retired. And Clarissa? She was the town's librarian, a soft-spoken, graceful woman who wore her hair in neat buns and her voice like a lullaby. Children adored her. Parents trusted her. Teenagers, even the restless ones, listened when she gave book recommendations, often with handwritten notes tucked inside. She remembered everyone's birthday, everyone's name, everyone's overdue fees, although she rarely enforced them. Together, Leonard and Clarissa were a matched set. Not fiery, not overly affectionate, but steady, unmoving. A kind of quiet love that looked safe. Their home? A modest red brick house at the edge of town, where the sidewalk ended and the pine trees began. Neatly trimmed hedges, a white porch bench, wind chimes that never tangled. Inside, it was spotless, predictable, like a museum curated by routine. They held hands during church hymns, dropped off pies at neighbors' doorsteps, shared glances during town hall meetings that said more than words ever could. No one had ever heard them argue. Not once. Not even a raised voice behind closed windows. There were no children, and when asked, Clarissa would smile gently and say, "It just wasn't in the cards for us." Leonard would nod, already looking elsewhere. And no one dared pry. Not in Brookhaven. This was a town where privacy was sacred, where gossip had limits, and where the Brooks were seen as a rare example of life done right. From the outside, their marriage wasn't filled with passion, but something else, a sense of deep rhythm. A long, slow dance where no one ever stepped on the other's toes. People didn't talk about Leonard and Clarissa as individuals. They said the Brooks, like it was one word. A unit. An institution. Every Sunday, second pew from the front, Clarissa in pastel dresses with small brooches shaped like birds or flowers. Leonard in crisp slacks and clean boots. Even after the badge was put away for good, they rarely lingered after service. Just nods. Quiet smiles. Back home, before most people even made it to brunch. To Brookhaven, they were peaceful, predictable, perfect. But behind the silence, beneath the years of folded newspapers and neatly made beds, was a secret. A devastating, unspoken truth buried so deep that even time itself seemed afraid to disturb it. Because no matter how perfect a couple may look, there's no such thing as a house without shadows. You can live with someone for 30 years and still know nothing about them at all. At first glance, Leonard and Clarissa Brooks seemed like a couple who had everything figured out. But once the front door of their red brick home clicked shut behind them, it was a different story, one written in hushed footsteps and closed doors. Their house wasn't just quiet. It was eerily quiet. Every object had its place. Every routine had its schedule. The kitchen clock chimed on the hour precisely. The bathroom light flickered, always 3 times before staying on, and no one ever bothered to fix it. Not because they didn't notice, but because that flicker had become part of the ritual. Clarissa made tea every evening at exactly 5 o'clock. Earl Grey. 1 sugar. Never 2. Leonard read the newspaper every morning, folded into perfect thirds, creased just so. After decades in uniform, precision still ruled him. He wrote lists in a small leather notebook he carried in his back pocket. Groceries, repairs, errands. His handwriting? Immaculate. They shared meals, but rarely conversation. Dinner was polite. Efficient. "How was your day? Need anything from the store?" That was about as deep as it ever went. They never fought, but they never laughed either. They didn't kiss goodbye. They didn't hold each other at night. There were no arguments in the Brooks household, but there was no intimacy, either. Not emotional, and certainly not physical. Because Clarissa had rules. Not rules you'd find written down. No, these were invisible rules. Unspoken boundaries she never explained, but always enforced. Rule 1. She never undressed in front of Leonard. Not once. In 30 years of marriage, she always changed behind a locked bathroom door, even in emergencies. On vacations, during power outages. Didn't matter. She laughed it off, saying it was just Southern modesty. And Leonard, raised in a strict Baptist home, accepted it. He respected boundaries. Or at least, he thought he did. Rule 2. No doctors. Clarissa hadn't seen a physician since the year before she married Leonard. Her last physical was on file from 1991. After that, nothing. She hated hospitals. Said white coats made her anxious. She swore by home remedies. Peppermint oil for headaches. Ginger tea for nausea. Epsom salt for muscle aches. Anytime Leonard suggested a checkup, she'd brush it off with that familiar smile. No need to poke at what ain't broken. And Leonard didn't push. Rule 3. No touch. This one was harder to ignore. Clarissa avoided physical intimacy. In bed, she'd sleep stiff, arms tucked in, never curled toward him. She'd offer soft kisses, but never linger. She hugged with her arms, never her body. Once, early in their marriage, she told Leonard that she had trauma, that intimacy was difficult. Leonard didn't question it. Maybe he was relieved. He wasn't a touchy man either. In his mind, love didn't need to be loud. So they drifted into a kind of companionship, two roommates with matching rings, sharing groceries and chore charts, but not lives. Not really. To the town, it didn't matter. People saw what they wanted to see. The Brooks smiled when they were supposed to. Showed up on time. Never caused trouble. But inside their tidy home, their lives ticked on, mechanical and hollow. They lived beside each other, but never within each other. No deep talks. No curiosity about the past. No confessions over wine or whispers in bed. Leonard never asked about her childhood. Clarissa never asked about his years on the force. And somehow, that silence became the glue. It held everything together. Their routine, their peace, their fragile sense of trust. But silence doesn't mean safety. It doesn't mean understanding. And it certainly doesn't mean truth. Because what looked like privacy, what felt like mutual respect, was really a wall. A wall built so high and so quietly that by the time Leonard noticed it was there, it was already too late to climb over. It only takes one moment, one envelope, to unravel 30 years of trust. In the spring of 2022, Leonard Brooks had been retired for a little over a year. The badge was gone. The uniform hung in a separate closet now, crisp, untouched, like a relic of a man who no longer existed. The days were slower, quieter, too quiet. To fill the hours, Leonard busied himself with small projects. Fixing the fence, cleaning the gutters, and finally, the attic. That musty, forgotten space above their home had become a graveyard of old receipts, holiday decorations, water-damaged boxes, and things that should have been thrown out a decade ago. Leonard didn't expect to find anything interesting. He just wanted order, control, one more thing to manage, one more list to check off. But what he found wasn't on any list. Wedged behind an old yellowed mattress pad was a box labeled in fading black marker. Archives. It was heavy with paper, tax returns, church bulletins, library inventory sheets. Clarissa's handwriting everywhere. Precise. Neat. Just like her. But then, something caught his eye. A thick envelope. Worn. Curled at the edges. Sealed with clear tape, the kind that turns cloudy with age. And across the front, written in elegant, cursive script. Victor Allen Mathers. Leonard frowned. Who? That name meant nothing to him. Nothing in 30 years of marriage rang any bells. He sat down right there on the attic floor, legs crossed, dust floating in the light. The silence around him was heavy, and when he broke the seal, the air seemed to thin. Inside the envelope were a handful of documents. A birth certificate, a court order, and a photograph. The picture showed someone who looked eerily similar to Clarissa, but younger, sharper, more angular. It was her, and yet it wasn't. He flipped to the birth certificate. Name, Victor Allen Mathers. Born, 1961. Gender, male. Place of birth, Augusta, Georgia. Date of birth, same as Clarissa's. His pulse quickened. Next came the legal paperwork. A name and gender change. Dated 1992. Victor Allen Mathers had legally become Clarissa Lynn Mathers. 1 year before she met Leonard. He blinked, swallowed, blinked again. He was a trained officer, a man who'd walked into murder scenes without losing his composure. But this was different. This wasn't a stranger's crime. This was his life, his wife. 30 years. 30 years of trust, of habit, of routine, rewritten by a single page of legal ink. His fingers trembled. He pulled out his phone and accessed a law enforcement database he still had credentials for. Old habits die hard. He typed in her name, her social security number, her birth date. The results came back in seconds. Former name, Victor Allen Mathers. Gender, male-female. No criminal history. Clean background. But real. Very real. Leonard froze. His chest tightened like a vice. He looked at the photograph again, the face that looked like Clarissa's but wasn't. The timeline. The missing doctor visits. The reason she always changed behind a locked door. The silence. The absence of children. The tenderness that never became passion. Suddenly, everything had context. And none of it was the context he wanted. He sat in that attic for over an hour, staring at nothing, surrounded by dusty ornaments, yellowed paperwork, and the shattered bones of a marriage he thought he understood. He'd spent 3 decades loving a woman who had never told him the most defining truth about herself. Not once. Not ever. Was it all a lie? That question, that single, agonizing question, would haunt him for the rest of his life. But the silence that followed, that silence would kill. You think you're living in a house. Then you realize you've been living inside a lie. Leonard Brooks didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, motionless, the folder still beside him, its contents spread out like open wounds on the smooth wooden surface. The coffee he poured went cold. Twice. He didn't even notice. The walls around him, the ones he'd painted, patched, and decorated with Clarissa over the years, suddenly felt like strangers. The fridge hummed. The kitchen clock ticked. But the house felt hollow. Foreign. Every corner whispered a new version of the past. Every shadow was cast by a memory now tainted. He looked down at the papers again. Victor Allen Mathers. Born 1961. Transitioned 1992. Became Clarissa Lynn Mathers. Became his wife. The woman he loved. The woman he married. The woman he thought he knew. Leonard closed his eyes. Scenes flashed through his mind like a real unraveling. Their courthouse wedding. Clarissa said she didn't want a big event. No dress, no photos, no family. He respected her wishes. He wasn't sentimental. Or so he told himself. Her refusal to talk about children. It just wasn't in the cards for us, she'd say. Eyes soft, voice low. He never questioned it. The locked drawer in the guest room. The private P.O. box where she insisted all her medical mail be sent. The fact that, in 30 years, she'd never once let him accompany her to a doctor's appointment. He'd chalked it all up to personality quirks, personal trauma, respect for boundaries. But now, it all looked different. The truth had been hiding in plain sight. And he had missed it. How could I have been so blind? He wasn't just angry. He was humiliated. Leonard Brooks, the man who prided himself on control, on awareness, on knowing people, had somehow lived with a stranger for 3 decades. He felt like the last man in the world to get the joke. And the punchline was stamped across a government record with a different name and a different gender than the woman sleeping 1 room away. He stared at the screen of his old laptop, pulling up her DMV records. Her old ID. Her name change. Everything checked out. Everything was legal. But legality wasn't the issue. This was about trust. It wasn't the fact that she had transitioned. It was that she had never told him. Not once. Not when they met. Not when they married. Not when he'd built a life around her. She gave me her silence, he thought. And I built my entire life around it. He stood slowly, hands shaking, heart hammering in his chest. For a man who had faced armed suspects, pulled families out of burning cars, and delivered bad news to broken mothers, this was somehow harder. He walked into the living room. The same room where they'd celebrated anniversaries, watched movies, napped on lazy Sunday afternoons. And now, it felt like a crime scene. His own mind, the investigator. And his marriage, the corpse. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. That wasn't Leonard. He didn't throw things. Didn't break plates. Didn't even curse. Instead, he moved in silence. The same silence that had held their marriage together for 30 years. But this time, that silence was different. It was cold. It was concentrated. And it was dangerous. In that moment, Something cracked in Leonard Brooks. Not loud, not violent, just permanent. Sometimes it's not the shouting that breaks you. It's the silence, the kind that wraps around your throat and squeezes until there's nothing left. The next morning, Clarissa hummed softly in the kitchen, just like she always did. She wore that familiar pink robe, her gray-streaked hair pinned loosely, her hands busy preparing eggs and toast. The smell of butter drifted through the air. Routine. Predictable. Safe. From the outside, nothing had changed. But Leonard? Leonard had changed. He walked in, dressed in slacks and a collared shirt, freshly shaven, polished even. But his movements were too precise. His face, stone. His eyes, blank. He sat at the table. Didn't say a word. Didn't touch the coffee. Didn't touch the food. Clarissa looked at him, a soft smile playing at her lips. "There's a new author visiting the library this week," she said, her voice light, hopeful. "The teens are excited. Young adult fantasy, I think." Leonard gave her a single nod. Silent. Unblinking. She continued, trying to fill the space. She talked about overdue books, the weather, a neighbor's dog that had gotten loose again. But none of it landed. She was speaking into a void, and she could feel it. Clarissa's smile began to falter. She folded her hands in her lap. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentler now, more cautious. Still, he said nothing. Just stood up, walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him. Clarissa stood in the kitchen, surrounded by silence, so heavy it felt like the ceiling might cave in. She looked down at the plate she'd prepared for him. Eggs, toast, and sliced apple, just the way he liked it. Not even a bite taken. The chair still rocked slightly from where he had risen. That's when the dread began to bloom in her chest. Not panic, not fear, just a slow, creeping realization that something terrible had shifted, and it might already be too late to pull it back. She moved to the living room, pacing slowly, her hands trembling. Should she ask? Should she confront him? But what would she even say? "Leonard, did you find it? Do you know? Are you angry?" No words came. Only the gnawing, unbearable knowing that the truth, the one she had buried so deep, was finally breathing air. That night, they didn't speak. Dinner was quiet. The television remained off. Clarissa sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes not really watching the book in her lap. Leonard? He stayed in the garage for hours. The garage, his sanctuary, his old workspace, the place where he kept the things that mattered. Tools, notes, and the gun. She had secrets. But now so did he. At 2:17 a.m., Clarissa finally crept into bed. Leonard was already there. Eyes closed, breathing steady. She lay beside him, barely daring to move. The space between them in the bed felt like an ocean. She wanted to say something, anything, but instead, she turned away and stared into the dark. In that house, silence wasn't peace anymore. It was warning. It was countdown. It takes years to build a life, but only seconds to destroy it. By dawn, Clarissa could barely feel her own hands. She'd spent the night curled on the couch, still wrapped in the same blanket from the evening before. She hadn't slept. Not really. Just closed her eyes and listened. For footsteps, for a door creak, for a sign that Leonard was still the man she married. But none came. The house was too still, too calm, too dangerous. She made coffee, out of habit, not desire. Her hands trembled as she reached for the pot. And that's when it happened. The phone call. She didn't think. She just moved. She dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Her sister. Across state lines. A voice that answered groggy but concerned. "He knows," Clarissa whispered. There was silence. Then urgency. "Get out, Nessa. Right now. Don't wait. Just go." But she didn't move. Because how do you run from your own husband? The man who'd held your hand at church? Who fixed your radiator? Who memorized how you took your tea? Even now, even after the look in his eyes, she wanted to believe he wouldn't hurt her. Maybe he just needs time, she told herself. Meanwhile, in the garage, Leonard sat on the cold concrete floor. The door was locked behind him. The manila envelope lay in front of him, again. Open. Its contents staring up like ghosts from a past he never agreed to live with. And beside him, on a towel, sat the gun. His old service revolver. Still clean. Still loaded. He hadn't held it in years. But his fingers wrapped around it now like it had never left. He didn't move for hours. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. He just breathed. And remembered. Every single detail. The night she told him she didn't want kids. The way she flinched when people talked about pregnancy. The time she avoided the doctor after a car accident. The wedding without family. The guest room drawer, always locked. And now, the folder. Victor Allen Mathers. Not Clarissa. Not his wife. Not who she said she was. Not for 30 years. Was I ever her husband? Was she ever my wife? That evening, the house came back to life, or tried to. Clarissa dressed up. She wore a blouse he once complimented. Brushed her hair until it gleamed. Lit a candle on the dinner table. She made his favorite meal. Meatloaf. Mashed potatoes. Green beans. Warm rolls with butter. She straightened the silverware. Smoothed the tablecloth. Sat with her back straight. And waited. Tick. 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 But Leonard didn't come out. 8 p.m. Nothing. 8:30 p.m. The candle burned low. The potatoes cooled. 9 p.m. The front door opened. Leonard walked in. Not with rage. Not with chaos. Just presence. He didn't speak. Didn't take off his coat. Didn't look at the food. And Clarissa? She looked up. Hope flickering in her eyes like the flame beside her plate. Can we talk? She asked, voice soft. Leonard didn't answer. He didn't sit. He didn't flinch. He just raised the gun. One shot. That's all. The sound was sharp. Not explosive. Not cinematic. Just a clean, decisive end. Clarissa slumped forward over the table, her cheek landing softly on the edge of the plate. The candle beside her flickered, then went out. Leonard didn't run. He didn't scream. He didn't even touch her. He walked to the counter, set the revolver down gently, and called 911. I just shot my wife, he said. She lied to me for 30 years. Then he walked outside, sat on the porch, and waited. Just like that. Like he'd finished taking out the trash. And just like that, a marriage of 3 decades ended with a sound no louder than a sigh. It takes a second to pull a trigger, but generations to clean the blood off the walls. The next morning, the town of Rosewood Ridge awoke to the shrill cry of sirens, the shimmer of police tape, and a truth no one was prepared to face. Clarissa Mathers, the town librarian for over 2 decades, shot and killed by her own husband. And not just any husband. Leonard Mathers, former police officer, community pillar, Sunday church usher, a man who once received a medal for stopping an armed robbery without firing a single shot. Now, he was in the back of a squad car, staring out the window like a ghost. The headline broke by 10 a.m. Retired officer shoots wife in shocking domestic homicide. And by noon, the town wasn't whispering, it was shouting. Inside the house, nothing was out of place. The kitchen table was still set for 2. Plates full. Candles melted halfway. No struggle. No overturned chairs. No screams. Just Clarissa's body. And the hole in her blouse. And the quiet stillness of a life extinguished mid-meal. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was something else. At the station, Leonard didn't cry. He didn't ask for a lawyer. Didn't beg. Didn't curse. Didn't even explain. He only said 3 words when asked for motive. 30. Damn. Years. Back in Rosewood Ridge, the community split like an earthquake had hit the town center. On one side, neighbors, former colleagues, churchgoers, people who said Leonard was a good man, a man pushed too far. He was lied to, they muttered. Deceived. Tricked. Can you blame him? Old men in barber shops defended him. Prayer groups wept. Not for Clarissa, but for Leonard. They pinned blue ribbons on their doors. Support our officer. Protect traditional values. One former colleague even told reporters. He was a cop, not a killer. That woman, she was never honest. Not for a day. But the other side? The youth. The students who'd sat at Clarissa's story time. The teens she mentored at the library. The quiet misfits she protected when no one else did. They were furious. Heartbroken. They didn't care about what she used to be. They knew who she was, and that was enough. She gave me my first book. She helped me come out to my parents. She was the only adult who ever listened. They built a memorial on the library steps. Flowers, poems, photos, and a cardboard sign written in bright marker. You lied, but you loved. And that's all that mattered. Social media exploded. The case became a lightning rod. Cable pundits argued about betrayal, identity, and masculinity. Some called Clarissa a fraud. Others called Leonard a murderer, hiding behind a badge and broken pride. The library was vandalized one night. Red paint across the front doors. She deserved it. And the next morning, someone else spray painted over it. No one deserves this. In Rosewood Ridge, it wasn't just a murder anymore. It was a reckoning. Even Clarissa's funeral was a battleground. Half the town came in black, quietly grieving. The other half, they didn't show up. Or worse, stood across the street in silent protest. Some whispered it wasn't a real funeral. Others wept openly, clinging to memories of a woman who never once made them feel small. The service was brief. No speeches, no eulogies, just a quiet plaque placed near her casket. For the librarian who taught us that everyone's story deserves a shelf. Dead women don't testify, but sometimes they still speak. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, neighbors, strangers with opinions they hadn't earned, all crammed into the rows like spectators at a show no one should have bought tickets to. And at the center of it all, seated beside his defense attorney with a face carved from granite, was Leonard Mathers. No emotion, no guilt, just stillness, as if he'd already decided how this story would end. The prosecution began slowly, methodically. They showed the crime scene, the meal still on the table, the unwashed fork, the revolver, the absence of a struggle. They painted the picture not of a man who snapped, but of a man who decided. A man who took hours, days, to plan. A man who found her documents, researched her history, loaded the gun, watched her from the parking lot of the library like a predator circling its prey. This wasn't rage, they argued. This was premeditation. And then came the moment that cracked the room wide open. "Your Honor," the DA said, holding up a phone in a plastic evidence bag, "we have a voice memo from the victim, dated the afternoon of her death." The courtroom fell completely silent. You could hear the sound of someone's pin dropping in the back row. And then it played. Clarissa's voice. "If something happens to me, it's because he couldn't accept who I've always been." Just a whisper. But it landed like a scream. Her voice didn't tremble. It wasn't begging. It was resigned. And in that moment, the trial stopped being about law. It became about fear. About identity. About a woman who knew she was running out of time and still refused to run. The defense tried to strike back. They painted Leonard as a man shattered by deception. They used words like emotional collapse and moral betrayal. They brought in a psychiatrist to say Leonard experienced acute dissociation, a break from reality triggered by the revelation. He didn't pull the trigger out of hate, the doctor said. He pulled it out of shock. They blamed Clarissa, blamed her for not telling the truth, blamed her for hiding her past, blamed her for building a life on what they called a false foundation. But when the prosecutor returned, she said only this: "We all have parts of ourselves we don't reveal. But no part, no secret, ever justifies murder." And then she pressed play on the voice memo again. This time, the entire room cried. Even the jurors. Because it wasn't just a message. It was a goodbye. "I never wanted to lie. I just wanted to be loved. I thought I could be enough. I thought I could outrun who I was." Those words stuck in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. And when they finished playing it, Leonard Mathers didn't move, didn't blink, didn't shed a single tear. "You can hide behind shock," the prosecutor said in closing. "But you still pulled the trigger. You still sat down to that dinner table. You still looked her in the eye and ended her." The jury deliberated for just one day. They didn't argue. They didn't doubt. They returned with a single word that carried the weight of a 30-year silence. "Guilty. Guilty." The word slammed into the silence like thunder. Leonard Mathers stood still. No tears. No rage. No breakdown. Just that same hollow stare, as if the man had vanished long before the sentence had even been spoken. The judge didn't delay. Life in prison. No parole. No appeals. The gavel fell with a crack that felt like the final breath of an entire life. A life built on silence. A marriage built on avoidance. And a town built on the illusion that some things were better left unspoken. Leonard didn't say a word as he was led away. Didn't look back. Didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't even flinch when someone in the gallery whispered, "Coward." He was processed, booked, assigned an inmate number. Number 47391. Just another man behind steel doors. A man who once carried a badge, now wearing prison blues. And somewhere, deep down, maybe even he knew, he hadn't just lost a wife. He'd lost every version of himself worth remembering. Back in Rosewood Ridge, the sentence hit like a wave. Not everyone agreed. Some still whispered behind closed doors. He was lied to. He snapped. She brought it on herself. Others stood firm. She was murdered for daring to live honestly. He had a choice. He made the worst one. This wasn't justice delayed. It was justice demanded. Clarissa's funeral was held quietly. Gray skies overhead. Muddy grass underfoot. Just a few rows of folding chairs in the back corner of the town cemetery. Her sister sat in the front. Eyes red, hands clenched around a folded tissue. Some of the library staff came. A handful of kids she once read to, now grown. No priests. No choir. No speeches. Just the sound of dirt falling on a coffin. And a plaque, placed gently by her sister before she left. For Clarissa, the woman who gave the world stories, but never got to finish her own. Even in death, she was only allowed half the ceremony. Back at the Rosewood Ridge Public Library, her desk stayed untouched for weeks. A mug still sat beside the monitor. Bookmarks scattered. A half-shelved stack of returned books waited patiently for hands that would never come back. The board eventually voted to honor her. Not with a statue, not with headlines, but with something smaller, quieter, more fitting. A corner of the library, renamed Clarissa's Shelf. A collection of books on identity, memory, survival, and love. Some protested. A few called it inappropriate, political, unnecessary. But the children? The ones she had read to? The ones she had whispered encouragement to after school? They came in one by one, placing sticky notes on the shelves. She told me it was okay to be weird. She helped me find books when I couldn't read out loud. She let me cry and never asked why. And over time, something strange began to happen. Her name became louder. Not the name on her birth certificate. Not the one Leonard had discovered too late. But the name she chose. Clarissa. And the life she built under it. Not in defiance, but in hope. Some stories don't end. They echo. In the months that followed the verdict, Rosewood Ridge changed. Not with riots or protests, but with a kind of quiet unease that settled over front porches and dinner tables. The grass outside the Mathers house grew tall. The mailbox overflowed. Kids stopped riding bikes past the corner. It was no longer that red brick home with the garden. It was now simply the murder house. Real estate agents wouldn't touch it. Neighbors wouldn't mention it. The town boarded it up like a wound they didn't know how to clean. At the police station, Leonard's photo was quietly taken down from the wall of retirees. No ceremony. No plaque. Just a blank spot where once hung the face of a man who wore a badge and a lie. And yet, Clarissa's presence began to bloom in the most unexpected places. A high school girl, once too shy to speak in class, now volunteered to run the library's teen reading group. A boy she once tutored, now 13, won a state spelling bee and wrote, "For Miss Clarissa," on his entry form. The library's new book club read memoirs about identity. The local school board approved its first ever discussion on gender and self-discovery. And still, there were whispers. She deceived him. He was a good man. She wasn't honest. But those voices were slowly drowned out, not by shouting, but by stories. The ones Clarissa gave, the ones she never got to finish, and the ones now told in her name. Because for all the noise around her death, the truth was simple. She wasn't murdered because she was dangerous. She was murdered because she was different. Because someone couldn't accept that truth doesn't always come in a shape you expect. I never wanted to lie. I just wanted to be loved. That line, that broken, beautiful, devastating line, became a refrain. Painted on murals, typed in obituaries, whispered in classrooms by kids who were learning that identity is not deception, that survival is not betrayal, that sometimes the greatest risk is to simply exist as you are. Leonard's name would vanish from the public record, sealed in court files and forgotten by choice. But Clarissa's story? It became a cautionary tale, not about marriage, not even about secrets, but about the power of silence. How it can stretch like scaffolding around a life, holding it up, keeping it intact, until the first crack reveals the rot beneath. 30 years. 30 years of brushing things aside, of not asking, of not telling. A house with clean floors but locked drawers. A couple who smiled in public but never truly looked at each other. And all it took to shatter it was one envelope. Clarissa had loved him. In her own way. In her quiet way. In the only way she believed she could without risking it all. And maybe Leonard loved her too. But love without honesty is just performance. In the end, the story of Leonard and Clarissa Mathers wasn't about justice or crime. It was about what happens when people live beside each other and never truly see. It was about how much of ourselves we're willing to hide just to be safe. And how sometimes that hiding becomes a prison. Secrets are heavy. Clarissa once whispered to a coworker during a late shelving shift. You carry them long enough, and they start carrying you. Now, her story carries others. Kids who feel different. Adults who live quietly. Strangers who've never said certain truths out loud, afraid of what might happen if they did. They hear her name. They read her story. And maybe, just maybe, they speak. Because Clarissa Mathers didn't die for being dishonest. She died for being unknown. For 30 years of silence. And one dinner that ended in blood.